In 1889, in the final lucid days before his mind gave out completely, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a letter that contained one of the strangest requests in the history of philosophy. He asked to be shown, not spared, the full weight of his own suffering. He wanted, in his words, to become someone who wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not for all eternity, not merely to bear what is necessary, but to love it. Sit with that for a second. A man in constant physical pain, nearly blind, isolated from almost everyone who could have understood him, was asking himself to love the very conditions that were destroying his body. Not accept them, not tolerate them, love them. If this is your first time watching, before we go further, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and drop a like because this channel is building a complete, in-depth series on Nietzsche's philosophy. And this idea, the one we're about to unpack, might be the single hardest and most transformative one he ever left behind. Here's the question this video is actually built around. What if the worst day of your life isn't something to survive, escape, or eventually forget, but something you're meant to eventually think? Nietzsche had a name for this idea. He called it amor fati, the love of fate. And once you actually understand what he meant by it, you may never look at your own hardest days the same way again. Let's start with what most people do with pain, because it's almost universal. When something devastating happens, a failure, a loss, a betrayal, a diagnosis, a collapse of something you built your identity around, the instinctive human response is resistance. Why did this happen to me? This shouldn't have happened. I don't deserve this. The mind treats the event as an intruder, something fundamentally wrong with the story of your life, a chapter that needs to be edited out or explained away before the story can continue. Nietzsche believed this instinct, while completely understandable, quietly traps people in a kind of permanent psychological war with their own past. Because here's the problem with resisting something that has already happened. It already happened. Resistance doesn't undo it. It doesn't even reduce its impact. All it does is add a second layer of suffering on top of the first. The pain of the event itself, plus the ongoing pain of refusing to accept that the event occurred at all. You end up fighting a battle you've already permanently lost over and over for years, sometimes for the rest of your life. Nietzsche's answer to this trap wasn't resignation. It's important to be precise here, because amor fati gets misunderstood constantly, usually flattened into something closer to everything happens for a reason or passive positive thinking. That is not what Nietzsche meant. He wasn't asking you to smile through pain, or pretend it doesn't hurt, or tell yourself a comforting lie about hidden cosmic purpose. He was asking for something far more demanding, an active, fierce, deliberate embrace of what happened, precisely because it happened as necessary material for whoever you are in the process of becoming. The difference between resignation and amor fati is the difference between a prisoner who has simply stopped struggling against his chains and an artist who picks up the exact same chains and forges them into something he chooses to build with. Same raw material, completely different relationship to it. To understand why Nietzsche believed this was even possible, you have to understand his broader idea about suffering itself. He wrote that the discipline of great suffering is the only thing that has ever created any elevation in humanity. This sounds almost cruel on the surface, but his actual argument is more precise than it first appears. He wasn't claiming suffering is good in itself. He was claiming that nearly everything of genuine depth, strength, or meaning that a human being ever develops, resilience, wisdom, compassion earned through real understanding, the capacity to help someone else through something you've actually survived, is forged specifically under pressure and nowhere else. Comfort doesn't build any of these things. It has never once built any of these things. It simply preserves whatever version of you already existed before the comfort began. This means your hardest days aren't an interruption to the meaningful parts of your life. According to Nietzsche, they may be the actual construction site of everything meaningful you will ever become. But here's where most people get stuck, and it's worth naming directly because it's the honest, difficult part of this idea. Knowing that suffering can build character doesn't automatically make suffering feel bearable while you're inside it. Nietzsche himself struggled enormously with his own pain. The migraines that confined him to darkened rooms for days, the isolation, the professional rejection, the collapse of nearly every relationship that mattered to him. He wasn't writing Amor Fati from some untouchable position above human suffering. He was writing it as a man actively drowning in his own, trying to find a way to keep his head above water without lying to himself about how deep the water actually was. This is why Amor Fati isn't a single decision you make once and then permanently possess. It's a practice, something closer to a discipline you return to again and again, especially on the days it feels most impossible. So what does this actually look like practically when you're in the middle of your hardest day, rather than reflecting on it years later with the comfort of hindsight? The first step Nietzsche points toward is separating the event from the story you're telling about the event. The event is simply what happened: the loss, the failure, the diagnosis, the rejection. Neutral, in the sense that it's already finished, already fixed in the past, immune to being changed by how much you resent it. The story is everything you've layered on top of it. This ruined me. This proves I'm not enough. This means my life is permanently worse now. Nietzsche's challenge is to notice that the story is optional, even when the event isn't. You cannot undo what happened. You have far more control than you think over the story you decide to build from it. The second step is asking a specific, deliberately reframed question. Not "why did this happen to me?" A question that has no useful answer and usually just deepens the sense of being a victim of your own life. Instead, what does this now make possible that wouldn't have been possible without it? This isn't about pretending the hardship was secretly good. It's about refusing to let the hardship be wasted twice. Once when it happened, and again every day afterward that you spend resenting it instead of extracting something usable from it. The third step is understanding that Amor Fati doesn't require you to be grateful in the moment. This matters because a lot of people abandon the entire practice the first time they try to feel thankful for something devastating while it's still actively happening, and it simply doesn't work. The gratitude feels forced, hollow, even offensive to what they're going through. Nietzsche never demanded immediate gratitude. What he demanded was a refusal to let the event define you as broken permanently without your consent. You don't have to love your hardest day while you're living through it. You only have to refuse to let it convince you that this is the end of your story, rather than simply one difficult chapter inside a much longer one you're still actively writing. The fourth step is recognizing that this practice compounds. The first time you consciously choose to extract something from a hardship instead of simply resenting it, it feels almost impossible, forced, unnatural. But Nietzsche believed, and modern psychology has since largely confirmed, that this is a trainable capacity, not a fixed trait some people have and others don't. Each time you practice turning a difficult event into usable material rather than permanent evidence of your own smallness, the next hardship becomes slightly easier to work with. Not painless, never painless, but workable in a way it wouldn't have been before you'd built the muscle. This brings us to Nietzsche's final and most demanding test for whether you've actually internalized Amor Fati, rather than just intellectually agreeing with it. He asks you to imagine reliving your exact life in its exact sequence, forever. Every joy and every devastation, unchanged on an endless loop. Not a version with the pain edited out. The whole thing, exactly as it happened, repeating without end. Most people, asked to imagine this, immediately think of everything they'd want removed. Nietzsche's challenge is more radical than that. He's asking whether you could reach a place where you wouldn't want to remove any of it. Not because the pain didn't hurt, but because you've come to understand that removing it would also remove whoever it made you become. This is the revolutionary part of loving your hardest days. It's not an instruction to enjoy suffering. It's an invitation to stop treating your worst chapters as mistakes in the story of your life and start treating them as the specific, irreplaceable pages that made everything after them possible. So here's the question worth sitting with. The same one Nietzsche seemed to be asking himself in that letter from Turin in the final clear days before he lost the ability to ask anything at all. Is there a day in your life you've spent years wishing had never happened? And what would change, not about the day itself, because it's already finished, but about you starting today if you finally let yourself ask what it built instead of only what it broke? Nietzsche never promised this would be easy. He only promised that the alternative, a permanent, silent war against a past that cannot be changed, guarantees you lose twice. Once when it happened, and again every single day after that you refuse to put the weapon down. If this video meant something to you, make sure you're subscribed with the bell turned on, because the next one goes even deeper into exactly how Nietzsche believed we're meant to turn our deepest pain into our greatest strength, and you won't want to miss it.